Well, hello and welcome to GPS Financial Management. My name's Kelly Bennett, and most of you know me, but for those of you that don't, I would like to just briefly introduce myself. I started my business back in 1987, so this is my 30th year as a trainer, and I actually started as a trainer that taught people how to start a business for a living, and I traveled across Canada, eventually to 153 different cities, teaching people how to start a business for a living. And now I exclusively do business management training. But the experience of teaching people how to start a business really is helpful when you're teaching people how to manage as well. Because when people first start their business, they're excited, everything's going to go great, and they're going to make lots of money, and they're going to work less, and they're going to make more money. And then the reality is, when you're teaching people how to manage a business, you're more teaching them how to put out fires. But one thing I really like about the people that are starting is the enthusiasm. And my mentor, Bob O'Connor, who trained me back in the early 90s in the automotive training, he would say that if you stop right now, you've been running your business 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, 3 years, whatever it is, and if you stopped and thought, you know what, if I had the mentality that I had when I first started my business, the enthusiasm, the excitement, he said business would improve instantly. And he went on to explain that when you first started, you had your business cards everywhere you went, and yet I'll be in classes and I'll ask somebody, do you have a business card? And they don't. And yet when you start your business, you've got a pocket full of business cards and you're standing at the grocery store and you're going, oh, where do you get your car fixed? And where do you get your car fixed? And you're excited about your business and you're marketing it to independent people or individuals. And again, I think that if we went back to that enthusiasm that we had, but sometimes we get worn out, and I know what it's like. You can eventually actually even hate your own business. What I find interesting, by the way, is you can hate and love your business all in the same day, where you're thinking, oh, I love this business, is finally we're getting to the next level, and then in the afternoon think, oh my God, payroll's tomorrow, how am I going to make payroll? This thing's not going to last. But anyway, so I started with that business, and then in about 1990, I was asked by a college in British Columbia if I could do what I did for the automotive industry, and I'm going to date myself even earlier. In 1978, 79, and 80, I was a service advisor in an independent repair shop. It was actually a Texaco gas station. Now, in the U.S., you still have Texaco, but for Canadians listening, you know I'm dating myself because we haven't had Texaco here in a long time. But I was a service advisor in a shop then, and then I went into the oil industry. But so I did have some experience in doing that. So I said, yeah, I'd love to do it. And so I started doing training with the automotive industry, and now that's all I do. I traveled all across Canada teaching with a bunch of different, well, I shouldn't say a bunch, a couple of different major parts companies. I was asked to do some work in the United States, which I started in 1996, and eventually got to all 50 U.S. states. But it's been an amazing career, working with literally tens of thousands of people and managing their shops and helping them put out fires and training, etc. So my business has, again, this year, 30 years, and I love what I do. I'm still learning stuff as we go along. And there's going to be two of us that are going to be on some of these training sessions anyway. And his name is Kevin King, and I'm just going to let Kevin introduce himself. So go ahead, Kevin.
Hi, Kelly. Good afternoon. So as Kelly mentioned, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this class and ongoing with these webinars. I really enjoy the opportunity. For myself, I come from an automotive enthusiast background. I was a car buff with my brother and my friends. I got into the arts business. It just kind of made sense because I could get a discount. And I drove the truck. I worked the counter. I worked weekends. I moved up through from 88 to many years in the business. I've managed multiple stores. I have done everything from route sales, taking oil filter orders, to collecting money from shops, to the rollout of computers in the early 90s, when parts stores started to help shops raise their financial literacy by electronic cataloging, electronic invoicing. And I really found that to be something that I was really excited in. And then to find out 15 years later that I would finally make the move from managing parts stores and managing service facilities and body shops and doing sales routes to actually implementing software in shops. And today that is my primary function and vocation in what I do. I sell a management program, and I'm one of the trainers that actually implements, teach people the best practices. A lot of what you teach, I basically teach them the buttons and keystrokes of how to actually implement it and where to find those tools inside of the software. So I I really bring up, my passion comes from just transferring of knowledge of things that I've seen over my 25, 30 years from the parts perspective, being in all the different shops, delivering, collecting, helping people find locations, move, including parts stores. So I'm really excited to share my knowledge and as well learn from what Kelly's teaching on how that stuff applies directly to a management program and how I can better serve my customers as I'm training them.
Okay, thank you. You didn't mention the name of the software, but I'm going to. I know you didn't want to do a commercial, and nor do I, but the software is GemCar, and in my 30 years experience, I've worked with and talked with people who use pretty much every different management software, going back as far back in the days to the DOS-based PACE program and some others, and I can tell you just from my experience that I believe that for many reasons GemCar is the absolute best software. Recently I was doing a traveling trip with Kevin, and we were doing some joint training in the province of Ontario, and he did some of the training along with me, and I loved it because he brings experience to the training that I don't have. And so we all have our part. And of course, I've learned from many, many people over the years. But Kevin, you've got some amazing expertise. And I sat there watching you teach some of my stuff and think, oh, wow, look at that. He's got a different perspective. So not one person knows everything, but together we certainly know a lot. Now, some of you watched the short little video, the 37-minute video where I introduced this 5-part series, but I can't assume that everybody watching this did. So I'm just going to take a brief look, not 37 minutes, but just in some of the introduction to GPS and why I call this workshop GPS. We're going to go through a short little PowerPoint presentation, and you've got your notes in front of you. And this part you don't have because it's the PowerPoint, but I just want to take a look at the big picture stuff, and then we'll get into the actual Word document that we provided for you. So GPS, I look at GPS and I find that GPS does 3 things. It shows you where you're at, and I love that. I used to travel, as I mentioned, in the US, all 50 states, and being a country bumpkin, when I would get to places like Chicago or New York or LA, I'd think, oh my God, where am I? And GPS didn't exist, and so it was a lot of maps. But when you don't know where you're at and you're in a foreign city, GPS is very important where it tells you where you're at. Now, if you're at home, you know you're at home, and your GPS knows that as well. But when you're someplace and you have no idea, you've been driving, you get lost, you don't know exactly where you are, the GPS will tell you where you are at. And my experience, a lot of people in business don't really know where they're at. Some people are really on the numbers and some people not so much. So we need to know where we're at. And we're going to go through some calculations to show you where you can find out where you're at when it comes to the business. And then the second thing, you tell it. It doesn't tell you, here's where you want to go. You tell it, here's where I want to get to. And we show you benchmarks in this class. Now, I'd like to be clear that a benchmark is not where the average shop is at. I found in classes people said, you said the average was, and what I really meant was the benchmark is where we'd like you to be. And those benchmarks are not just numbers we pull out of the air. Many I learned from Bob O'Connor when he first started teaching me back in the 90s about automotive management. And of course, I've made some adjustments to those. But I would never show you a benchmark that I don't know anybody who's accomplishing it. I'm not a person who embellishes. I don't, in fact, exaggerate stories. And I want to be absolutely realistic. So when I talk to you about somebody who's doing $43,000 a month in sales per technician or 53 or whatever, I don't make up those stories. But at the same time, a benchmark is a goal. It's where we believe that you should be. And is it possible to get there? Yes. Now the 53,000, I'll mention that a little later on, that's a rarity, a very rare occasion. That's a shop that does about $45,000 a month. But anyway, you need to tell your GPS where you want to go. And then the third thing, it shows you step by step how to get there. And so I call this session GPS because I think there's 3 things that we need to know. You are here. Where do you want to go? And how do you get there? And I know there's some training sessions I've heard people have gone to where they say they're really good at talking about where you should be, but not the strategy and how to get there. And so Kevin and I are going to be spending time, not so much in the first one here, but we're going to get into a big overview. This is more of an introduction to financial management, but over the course of this 5-week series, we're going to be able to show you exactly where we believe that you should be, and then we're going to go through the detail on how to get there. If we didn't tell you how to get there, that would not be fun. You don't want your GPS just saying, here's where you need to be, or you tell it and it doesn't tell you how to get there. Sometimes the you are here, I saw this picture and I thought, well, that's a little bit big picture. Some people just know they're here. I don't know a lot about all this, galaxy stuff, but I'm thinking that's a picture of the entire galaxy and we are one tiny little speck. That's a bit too big picture, and so we want to know a little bit more than that. I found this picture on the internet. I thought it was kind of cute. Where it shows that these two mice are looking at a map. You are here, and they're in the belly of a snake. That's probably not a place you'd like to be, but being self-employed for 30 years, I can tell you there's times that I felt like I was a mouse in the middle of a snake thing, and I thought I should just go back and work for somebody else, but that didn't happen. Then there's a little bit too close where you are here. That's pretty obvious. You're looking down at a dot on the pavement that says you are here. That's a little bit too close. And I think it's more like this. When you go to a large mall and you've never been to that mall before, you want to see a map. The first thing you want to do is walk over to a map. I've been in the Mall of America. I've been in the Mall of Edmonton, the mall in Edmonton, West Edmonton Mall, and it's a monstrous place. And I've been in like Chicago Airport or whatever. We've all been in huge buildings that we've never been to before. And the first thing we need to do is let's find the map. And the first thing you want to see is you are here. And then you want to be able to see where you need to get to. And I was in a mall the other day for the first time, and fortunately I have the new computer, the touch screen, where you tell it where you want to go alphabetically. I put in the name of the store, and then it showed me you are here, and it showed me where the store was, and then the little dots that showed you how to get from where you're at to where you need to be. And so that's really what the GPS is about, is saying, I'm here, where should I be, and then how to get there. So pretty simple. This particular session is the you are here for the most part, and we are going to take a look at a few specific things. One is the 5 skills. For those of you that have taken training from me before, you've seen this before, so just be a little bit patient as we go through this, because it's very important to look at big picture first and then get into the detail. And so I won't spend as much time as I typically would in a training session, but I do want to take a look at what those 5 skills are. Then I want to take a look at the big financial picture from a large perspective, so to speak, from looking at the galaxy. And then we're going to go through a spreadsheet that I will be sending you called the Power of Team. And then we're going to do an introduction to the chart of accounts, and we're going to get some really good input from Kevin about chart of accounts and why that's important. And from talking with Kevin with helping people with their shop management system, Kevin, I've sensed your frustration when people are not aware of the chart of accounts and you're trying to help them understand that. And it's not stupidity. It's not that these people don't know stuff. There's stuff that you know that I don't know, the stuff that people know that somebody else doesn't know. Just because you don't know something doesn't make you stupid. You're just ignorant about that. And for example, if I came to your shop and you put me into your base to fix cars, I would be completely lost. Honestly, to be honest with you, I'd be your world's worst technician. I would be throwing tools. I would probably be swearing. Now, I know I'd be swearing, not that we'd ever see techs throw tools or swear, but because it's not my forte. And if you gave me a wiring diagram to look at, I would be completely lost. Recently, I did a session with a trainer who was one of the most brilliant technical trainers. His name is Mark LeMay, and he's in the province of Ontario. And he has a business that if you have a problem child with a vehicle that you just can't figure out, you hire him, he goes to your shop, and he diagnoses what it is, and he's brilliant at it. He doesn't fix it. You do that on your own. So I ran a class. It was called Selling and Doing Diagnostics. So day 1 was how to sell diagnostics, and day 2 was how to do it. And because I was hosting it, I sat in on the second day, and I watched Mark LeMay show PowerPoint presentations with wiring diagrams, and my head was spinning. I thought, I don't understand this. My brain's not wired to read wiring diagrams. And somebody would ask a question, and he would go, tell all this answer. And I said once, that's exactly what I would have said, the same thing. I mean, it went over my head. That doesn't make me stupid. It simply means I don't know how to fix cars. But if you gave me an income statement to read, that's something that I would understand. And so don't feel bad if you get some of the wrong answers as we go through this. I mean, my goodness, if everybody knew all of the stuff that I teach, then I'd have to get a real job, right, Kevin? And then we're going to get into what we call the, what's that?
I said that's correct.
Okay, the profit, yeah, you traveled with me recently, and traveling can be brutal, especially when you miss your train, which I won't get into that story. That was me. Profit Builder software is some actual software that you're getting, and because it's an executable file, actually, if I try to send that software out to you, it won't email because it's an executable file, but Kevin has some expertise with that. So what do they do with that file that I sent them that says .exe?
We'll change the format, and maybe what we could do is make it as part of the procedure. I could send an attachment to it.
Okay.
So if we change it from a .exe file to a .htm, or just make up a file, and then once they receive it, they rename the file .exe, and then they're going to be able to execute the file on their side. So maybe I could write a little procedure when you send that out. We could attach it to the document so that they would have a clear, precise how to do it.
Okay, so
screenshots, walk them through it.
They do a right click and then it shows rename, and then you just change the ending to .exe.
Correct.
Okay, good. Okay, and by the way, we also have a short little webinar on how to download this video to your hard drive so you can watch it anytime you want. And then to let you know, at the end of this, we're going to give you an assignment, and that's going to be to complete the Power of Team, which I'm going to show you how to do, and the Profit Builder software that we're sending to you that you'll change to a .exe. So that is the PowerPoint presentation that I showed from the introductory on how this class works. And now we're going to get into the exact material that you have, and you can simply follow along in your notes. I simply have on my screen exactly what you have in the notes. Now, to let you know one thing up front, you're going to notice as I scroll down to the next part of the page, I will stop talking. And that's because, what's it called, Kevin?
Tiling.
Tiling, there you go. Tiling happens, and for some reason I have a blank with that phrase, but that means you can't hear me saying anything, and then you think, oh, what did he just say, and I missed it. And so just to let you know, when I scroll down, I will stop talking and then resume talking so you don't hear me tiling, which means it's all garbled and you can't make out one word of it. It happens sometimes when you're talking to somebody in a cell phone, and you think, what was that? Okay. So set your GPS to higher profit is the goal here. And again, the GPS designed to do three things. Where am I? Where do I need to be? How do I get there? Now, as I mentioned, I do want to cover what we call the 5 skills to run a business. And this is material that I taught. And I'm just going to pull that down so you can see the whole screen, but you have the notes in front of you anyway. There are 5 skills that you need to run any business. And when I started the Starting a Business workshop, I taught this exact same thing. Now understand, this was not exclusively automotive. Yes, I had some people that were starting or buying an automotive shop, but there were people who came who were starting a restaurant. There were people who were starting a pet grooming facility, hairdressers. Sometimes they didn't want to tell you what they were starting because it was so unique and different. They didn't want to give it away, which makes sense. But it doesn't matter if you run even a nonprofit organization or a government office or a church or any kind of nonprofit. There are 5 skills that you need to run any kind of organization, association, or business. So this is more big picture stuff, but I will automotivetize it as I go through this. There are 5 skills that you need to run an automotive repair shop. Now on the top here, you may see me do this before if you've taken training with me, where I was asking you to rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. Now you may want to continue to do that if you've never seen this before, and I'll just add that to the notes here. I'm going to actually suggest, if you've not done this exercise before, that you do the 1 to 10, and I'll put an ampersand there, the best day of the week. The point of this is that you cannot do everything well, and you cannot focus on everything at the exact same time. In a large corporation, there are people that have different departments. There's a hiring department, HR. They have a finance department. They have sometimes accounts payable department. That's all they do is payables. And then they have accounts receivable department. And then there's marketing department. And usually there's sales separate from that. I worked with Worldpac for quite some time. Great company for lots of reasons. And there was a marketing department and there was a sales department. And I worked under the marketing department, which I thought was brilliant, because really the training aspect was not to increase sales per Worldpac, it was to educate customers, so much more of a marketing thing. And so there are 5 skills that you need, and the idea is to find out what your skills are and then farm out the rest. Number 1 is industry-specific skills, and this is an individual exercise. This isn't for your shop like Excel Auto. This is not, well, I've got some brilliant technicians and I'm going to score high here because they're brilliant. This is you. So how would you rank your industry-specific skills, your own personal ability to diagnose and repair today's cars? And the reason I say today's is because if you've been out of the bays for a while, you used to be in the bays a lot, but now you spend most of your time on the counter or in the office, then you aren't as current as you used to be. So you need to factor in some things here. Education, yes. Experience, yes. But how much time do you spend on that? So a couple things. One is on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rank your own ability to diagnose and repair today's cars? And the best week of the month is not so much applicable on this one. The idea is that you choose a specific time of the month to work on one of these specific things. And if you're already a technician, well, maybe you know that you're going to go to a diagnostic course once a year, something like that, to improve those skills. We believe it's about 40 hours a year to stay current as a technician, and so you may put that into your calendar. You're going to go off to a training session once a year. There's a bunch of them that are across Canada and the US. I've been into some shops with some brilliant technicians. A fellow by the name of Tony comes to mind, and he's been to pretty much every session that you can even think of. He's told the sales rep, when it comes, just sign me up, because there are times where you go to sign up and it's full. And so he'd say, no, if it's happening, let me know day one, sign me up, I'm in. And on his wall, he has a wall of fame with almost every certificate that you can possibly imagine for diagnostics and wiring diagnostics and such, fuel systems and fuel trim, whatever the heck that is. I've seen that one. Anyway, he's brilliant, and yet he continues to upgrade his skills, so he takes training on a yearly basis. Number 2 is day-to-day management. But before you rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, the question here is, how much time do you spend doing it? I mean, you can know a lot about management, but you get so distracted throughout the day that even something you can do well, you don't do well, because you're trying to do that in conjunction with everything else. Day-to-day management relates to this. If you were to videotape yourself for an entire week and watch yourself for a week, not your shop, just you, and analyze what you spent your time on, how much time would you say you've spent on managing that business, sitting at your desk, or maybe not at the shop? Sometimes it's easier to work on something when you're not there. The old E-Myth Visited, which is a great book, by the way, called the E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber, and he says that we spend so much time working in our business that we don't have time to work on it. And that's a brilliant concept, is sometimes we spend so much time doing that we're working in it instead of on it, so we're not managing it. How much time do you spend on your financial management? How much time do you spend on your marketing? How much time do you spend hiring and firing or whatever else you do, or performance evaluations? So the question is, how much of your day is spent doing day-to-day management? And one of my favorite authors, Dr. Richard Swenson, says that the average manager, he's not talking automotive here, but he says the average manager is interrupted 232 times a day. So if you're like that, even if you're good at management, but you're interrupted 232 times a day, then you're not going to do it well. And I can go into more detail on that. I'm going to resist that. Other things about management is training. How much training have you taken in the area of management? And maybe it's education. You went to school and you got a degree in business management, or you took management classes, automotive management classes or whatever. There's a lot of really great management training out there. And then the other part of this, of course, is experience. You can be brilliant at managing on paper, but now that you're managing the shop, managing people, managing inventory, managing time, managing everything else that you manage, maybe you don't have a lot of experience. And then there's some people who have experience but not the education. It reminds me of a saying I saw years ago, and it said, if you think that training is time-consuming and expensive, try ignorance. And sometimes we're doing things for a long time, but we're not necessarily doing it well. And it's like when you're watching your favorite team in a hockey game or a football game and you're not doing well and you can't wait for them to call the timeout. That breathing thing to think, okay, we're not doing well here. Let's call a timeout and take a couple minutes and rejig the whole thing. And sometimes we need to do that in business, is to say, you know what, I need a timeout here, and I'm, not 2 or 3 minutes in this case, but maybe you need to get away from the business for a couple hours and just go to a Starbucks coffee shop or home, or, well, if you've got kids at home, you probably don't want to do that, but a place where you can think without interruption. So how would you rank yourself in a day-to-day management? And then the best weekday, week of the month, it's kind of like a professional development day for a teacher. Teachers will stop doing what they do, teaching, and have a professional development day. I've got 2 really good friends that are teachers, and in fact, as both of them just recently in separate cities had their professional development days. And the idea is to take a break, a time out from being a teacher, to go to an event, to take classes on how to better prepare or how to better communicate or whatever it might be. And as a trainer myself, I find that I need to do the exact same thing. If all I do is teach what I know and I don't learn new things, then you're going to eventually catch up to me. And I need to, especially in a management group where you have the same people every single month taking training from you, I need to learn new things. And so where do I get that? I am an avid reader. I love TED Talks online. If you're not familiar with TED Talks, I suggest you do a Google of TED Talks. And there's brilliant TED Talks on marketing, on human behavior, and there's well over 1,000 of them. And they're all 12 to 15, 18-minute talks, very short. Some of the best communicators in the world are on there. And learning and learning and learning. So you need to take time away from what you're doing, including myself. I need to do that, and I love to learn. Number 3 is marketing. And marketing, advertising, and selling is extremely complex because it changes so much. And I notice I'm just a little bit OCD with that kind of stuff, so I just added that in paragraph, or the thing, what do you call it? Anyway, marketing changes all the time. When I first started training back in 1987, when I taught financial management, it was the income statement, it was the balance sheet, and it was the cash flow statement. And in this session, 30 years later, I'm teaching income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement. Benchmarks have changed, but the statements are the same, and they were probably the same 5,000, 7,000 years ago. But marketing has changed substantially. Years ago, we talked about Yellow Page advertising, how to create a nice flyer, and now it's internet-based marketing and eBay, or not eBay, sorry, some stuff maybe on Craigslist, you're advertising your work, or for a technician, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of those kinds of things. What I can tell you, the biggest change that I've seen is that marketing years ago used to cost a lot of money to run a Yellow Page ad, to run a radio ad, to send out flyers, to run a newspaper ad was money. Today, it's actually less expensive to market your business than any time before, but it takes time. For example, on LinkedIn, I worked it and worked it and worked it. I don't know how many hours I put into LinkedIn, but I have something like 5,800, 5,900 connections, something like that. And I set goals at the beginning of the month, how many I want to have by the end of the month. But it takes a lot of time. It doesn't cost anything. I mean, you can become an upgraded member, which personally, I've tried it and I don't see the benefit for what I do. Now, if you're looking at hiring people or getting hired, then it makes sense to do that. But the point is, it's free, but it takes a lot of time. And the same thing with Facebook or any other type of marketing, MailChimp, whatever you're doing, it is a time-consuming process. So the question is, how much time do you spend on your marketing? Do you take time at the end of the year to plan out the entire next year? And later on, we're going to be doing some marketing training. And by the way, having said that, I find that a lot of people don't come to marketing. It would be weird to say, but one of the hardest classes for us to sell is a marketing class, because a lot of people see the flyer that says marketing and they go, oh, I don't advertise. I don't need to go to that. But advertising and marketing are not the same thing. Advertising is a part of marketing, but it's not marketing. I've thought it through. I think advertising is only about 15% of the entire marketing process. So maybe you don't advertise, and in reality you should, because if you don't, then you're at the whim of when people come to the shops and to your shop, and they come when the car is already broke down, and we don't run promotions or ask them to come in earlier, etc. I'm just going to resist getting into too much detail. The challenge as a trainer after 30 years is I could spend a huge amount of time on each of these, but I'm going to resist. But advertising is only a part of it. Marketing is your company name, it's your slogan, it's your mission statement, it's how you answer your phone, it's your uniforms, it's your pricing, it's your packages, it's your comeback policy, it's everything that you do. And every single day, whether you advertise or not, you are marketing your business. How would you rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 for marketing? And then when is the best time for you to focus on your marketing? Maybe in November, you're going to say, I'm going to take a day away from the shop, my professional development day, and I'm only going to focus on marketing. And when you do something like that, I'm going to encourage you to have your phone turned off, because texting and email can be the #1 thing that causes those 232 interruptions. And marketing, I think, demands more creativity from you than any other of these aspects of running a business. And I think you can't stay creative if you've got 232 interruptions as you're trying to do that. The fourth is financial management. And financial management for some people comes easily, and for some people it doesn't. But it's a very important aspect of the business. My experience, and I've done this exercise, and again, I don't embellish, I've been doing this 30 years. I've taught this to tens of thousands of shops all across Canada, all 50 US states. And financial management and marketing are usually two of the areas that people need to work on the most. A lot of people with #1, they're brilliant technicians. The day-to-day management's pretty good. Leadership and team building pretty good. But where they really need more training and time spent in the business is the area of marketing and financial management. So financial management, of course, is understanding your income statement, your balance sheet, some cash flow stuff, and taking time. And again, you need to take time away from the business to look at your financial data. And you're going to see by the time we get to the 5th series in this, we are looking at over 160 lines of financial data that we believe that you should see about your business. Now, if I showed you that right now, for most of you, not all of you, but most of you would find that overwhelming. So, but that's where we're headed to. We're going to start with some simpler things, and then we're going to get into the more detailed things. And the idea is, if you're going to do a monthly composite for your business, which we encourage you to do, you're going to need to take some time away from the business to work on the financial management. How would you rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 on your financial information? How much time do you spend on it? Do you calculate your ratios? And then again, what would be the best time of the month? Usually at the beginning of the month is something you'd want to have already done before. And so maybe the 3rd week of the month, you think, okay, I'm going to start to do some financial planning for next month. And then maybe a week into the month, you're going to take and analyze the previous month. And lastly is leadership and team building, which relates to hiring and firing and motivating people and all of those kinds of things. How would you rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 with those? Now what you do is you simply add up what you scored under all 5, multiply it by 2, and you're going to see what percentage you are. Are you 60%, 50%, 80%, 90%? One last thing I'll say about this is I think that it makes sense to have somebody who knows you to do this for you. And I don't think it's because most of us are going to rank ourselves really high on something. Some people do. But most of us have a lesser thinking or mentality about ourselves. We don't think as highly maybe as we should. And so it makes sense to have somebody else who maybe you've got a blind spot about yourself. And I've had people tell me things that I didn't know about myself. One of my accountant years ago, he said, "You're so creative," and I would never, ever have considered myself to be a creative person, ever. And it's kind of interesting with you, Kevin, how many times you've said to me over the last year or 2 years that we've known each other, "I like your ideas, I like your ideas." And I think, okay, yeah, those are some pretty creative ideas. It's just something I tend to do well, and I follow through with some of them, not all of them, of course. But anyway, back to this. The question is, which of these are your best? And which of these can you focus on even becoming better at? And then which ones do you need to farm out? Now, I want to say something about financial management. And a lot of people think I can rely on my accountant. My accountant knows this stuff. And I want to tell you that your accountant probably doesn't. And Kevin, I'm going to get you to interject here, please, about what you've seen with people relying on their accountants.
mainly the real thing is we go to our accountant a couple of times a year. We reach out to them when we're having troubles or struggles, or they bring us the information and say, there's something wrong with this number, you need to review it. And often during training, I'll ask people, I'll say, this isn't a class on, on bookkeeping. I need to know what your bookkeeper wants to classify that as, or how your accountant wants to look at your monthly auto care membership fees or dues, or your uniform expenses. And I'll say, well, what's the general ledger or the GL for that? And most of the shops do not have that information. They'll say, oh, well, I'll get it, I'll get back to you. And it's weeks, sometimes months before we revisit that question that they proposed to me. So the problem with their accountant steering the ship is that often they're on your board. They're part of the assembly that you lean to or you ask questions of. But how frequently do you reach out to your accountant when you have a question, or your bookkeeper? And I find that time frame is much greater than it should be. It needs to be a lot more streamlined. So having them navigate the ship, you're already dry dock. It's already, I just find that breakdown is a little bigger than maybe we want to admit.
How many of your clients would you say, because you work with a lot of different people, their accountant only does automotive?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I challenge them all the time on the fact that, oh, well, I've got a great accountant. I have a great accountant. And I say, well, when you say you have a great accountant, do they have other shops like you that do what you do? So I'm actually surprised how many, once I dig into it a little bit, I find out that they do not seek advice from somebody who specializes in that particular industry, and they should. And I challenge them to that. I say, look, I'm not asking you to make a change in your accounting, but here are 6 specific questions that you should ask how they would like to handle them. And if these answers come back different than the advice I'm giving, because it's not an accounting class, you may want to maybe ask them for other people in their accounting firm or other accountants, how they would handle it. Because it really does create a lot of problems where hey, here's a subscription, how do you want to handle it? And they're like, oh, well, it's just cost of goods sold. Well, no, it's not. It's an office expense. It's an administrative expense. You should record it as such. And so I find that, I don't know that I could give you, I never took a survey, but I would say it's a very low percentage that are specifically automotive accountants.
In my experience, I've not seen one person where their accountant looks after everything, because, that would be really tough to find. I mean, a lot of accountants look after restaurants or pet stores or whatever, and I know a guy owned a pet store, and I don't know what the gross profit should be on crickets for people who have a lizard. I don't know what the gross profit should be on dog food or pet food. I don't know what the cost of goods sold should be in a restaurant. I mean, you see those people on TV where, the cooks and I can't remember, I don't own a TV actually, but the people who go into a restaurant and they go, well, your food costs are way too high and this is too high. Well, I don't know the benchmarks for restaurants, etc. I know the ones for automotive. And so if your accountant thinks, well, your gross profit on your parts is about what I see on crickets, that's not going to happen. And you really, in reality, you need to know more than your accountant does about your specific industry. Now, I'm not trying to make fun of accountants. When it comes to accounting and depreciation schedules, and when you're a corporation and all of the share structure and dividends and all of that kind of stuff, that's where they shine. But it's important for you to know what the benchmarks are for your specific industry. You're the one that's going to know where you need to be, and you're the one that's going to know how to get there. And your accountant hopefully can help you calculate where you need to be. And one thing I really recommend is that you share this information with your bookkeeper or accountant so they can know a little bit more about your industry. I'll give you an example of that. I have had many people over the years bring their accountant or bookkeeper to even sometimes our 2-day financial management class. And one fellow in particular, his name's Charles Marks, and I just want to mention him. He unfortunately just passed away about 6 weeks ago. One of my favorite clients, if you've been in training with me, I've probably talked about Charles Marks. Brilliant shop owner. We're doing, 2 shops, $3 million a year in sales. I mean, the guy did really, really well. But he brought his accountant to a session that I did in Richmond, Virginia, probably 17 years ago. And it was so funny watching him look at his accountant. And he said, "Do you know this?" "No, I don't." "Well, how come you don't know this?" "Well, he can't, because he does accounting for other businesses," and he made that clear. And then one time he said, "Don't you know this?" And the accountant said, "Yes, I do." He said, "That's even worse. you know what, you haven't even told me? And I felt so bad for that accountant. And the accountant said, well, it's going to cost you more. He said, I don't think so. You've been doing it wrong all these years and I've been paying you. Now you're telling me you're going to charge me more to do it right. Well, it's not that he didn't know. The guy was a brilliant accountant. He could do, tons of stuff that I had no idea about when it comes to share structure, etc. But when it came down to the automotive industry, and that was a fellow, by the way, that I got to know. He was at a management group I ran. He's in Norfolk, Virginia, and I've trained his staff, a really, really neat man. But when I showed him the income statement analysis tool, and I showed him what I believed that he should know every single month, I would go to his shop and he would have a binder that would have every single month of his income statement analysis tool. And he wanted to know, I think it was 17 things a month. And he told his bookkeepers, 17 things that I want to know. And I want a report. Where are we? I know where I need to be. I know how to get there, but I need you to tell me where we're at. So again, don't think that this is accounting stuff that just your bookkeeper needs to know this. You both need to. Okay, moving on to the next page. Again, we're looking at big picture stuff. There are 3 ways to make more money in business. 1, you can increase your sales. 2, you can increase your gross profit. 3, you can decrease your expenses. There's no other way to make more money. Now, there is one kind of if you had an asset and you sold the asset, you had a lift that you didn't need anymore, you sold it, then that'll generate some revenue, but it's really cash flow per se. It's not really increasing sales. It doesn't actually, well, it could show up in your income statement if you wanted to, but I wanted to be clear for the accountants on board, say, what about selling an asset? So I realize that's one, that's a rarity. When's the last time you sold a piece of equipment? So maybe you have, but number 1 is increase sales. The problem with this is that you can increase your sales without your profits. And I love this little picture that I found, increasing your profits, not just your revenue. You can increase revenue without increasing profits, and I'll tell you a very quick true story. All the stories I tell are true, and I don't embellish them. I had a fellow in Atlanta, Canada, quite a number of years ago, who had a tire store, and his son worked for him but didn't want to. He didn't like his hands being dirty all the time. He said he didn't want a blue-collar job, and I did get to meet him. His name's Trey. And he decided he was going to go to university and get a degree in marketing. So he didn't want a blue-collar job. He wanted a white-collar job. But he used Dad's blue-collar money to finance his university. He went to university for 4 years and tried to find a job in marketing and could not find one. So it's kind of interesting that you spend 4 years learning how to sell, and he couldn't. So he couldn't sell himself into a job, so he went to work for his father. To make the story quick, he increased his dad's sales in the first year of working with him, $287,000. He was the marketing genius behind it all, and he did some things that his dad was never able to do. They sat with the accountant at the end of the year, and the accountant said, I'm stunned. He said, look at this. He said, I've been looking after your books for many years, and you've always had incremental growth, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. He said, but this was exponential. I've never seen your business do that much of an increase in 1 year. It's almost a straight up curve. And the dad said, yeah, that's my son, boy. He knows his stuff. He helped us with this. And he said, yes, but you saw the problem. And he paused and said, the problem? What are you talking about? Our sales increased $287,000. Like, I don't understand what you're saying. He said, but your net profit only went up $240 over last year. All of that $287,000 went through that business, and it only brought them in an extra $240. I think it was $232, but I'll round it up to $240. How is that possible? Well, you work hard. You hire more people, you sell more tires, you buy more tires, you send out more flyers. You discount because you want to be the cheapest shop in town, and you sell more flyers, more tires. They opened 7 days a week. Why be open 6 days a week like they were when you can be open 7? Hey, people need tires on Sundays. Yeah, sometimes they could use tires at 3 o'clock in the morning as well, but are you willing to sacrifice your entire life to help people buy tires? It doesn't make sense. I believe this industry can, in most cases, be done 5 days a week. In some shops, it really needs to be 6 if you're in the tire business, etc. Maybe 6 days a week, but you want to have staff that are there on the Saturday. But most people can do a business like this in 5 days a week. Anyway, the point was that they bought more tires, they sold more tires, they spent more money in advertising, did all these great things, and it only brought in $240 more. I don't know about you, but I would rather have not even seen the $287,000. Could you imagine how much more they spent in MasterCard and Visa and American Express discounts, the 1%, 2%, 2.5, whatever it is? And by the way, that's one thing in expense management that you should do once in a while, is to shop to see what you can do in saving some money on that. Kevin, you and I have discussed that. There are some times where you can shop that and get a better rate. But again, that's only one way of increasing your money and getting more money, but decreasing expenses is in most cases the least effective of them all. So I don't know what they spent on those fees, but it was a lot. And it was an illusion of money. It was an illusion. They had lots of money going through the account. The bank balance looked better than it used to. Who made more money? The tire companies made more money. The newspaper made more money. The post office made more money. The printing company made more money. He hired more people. They made more money. And yet it didn't turn into sales. And so a lot of people focus on what their sales are, their sales are, their sales are. I'll give you one more example of that. I had a fellow in a session one time years ago, and he was wanting to close on Saturday. He didn't like the fact that he was working Saturdays and his kids were at home wanting to be, him to be home. And sometimes he'd bring them to the shop just so they could spend time with dad. But he decided he wanted to close Saturday. And the other problem was he was spending overtime because his guys were working 6 days a week. Now, sometimes people are off on the Tuesday to work the Saturday, but in this case, he was paying overtime. So I encouraged him to close on the Saturday simply because he had his kids. And I'll tell you the story. It's a true story. He would get to a point where he'd be full on the Saturday and he would close his gate. And that said, he's not taking any more cars, but people would go to his gate, they'd see his light on, see his car there, they would honk their horn, and he would go out and, oh, yeah, Charlie, yeah, come on in, I'll see what I can do. And I said to him one day, I said, your son, he had two sons. One would come to the shop, the other wouldn't. And I said, I'd like to go, and I said, this is a true story. I said, I would like to go to your house when you are at work on a Saturday and ask your wife that I could take your son to the shop and honk the horn outside of your gate. I said, because your son is honking for your time as well. And he teared up. And I'm telling you, he started to close on Saturday. He sent out an email to his entire database and said, I need to be able to close Saturday. And although some people weren't happy about that, most of his customers said, good for you. You really need that. You need time with your kids. And we believe that, you need to have a life, not just a business. So anyway, that's a true story. But anyway, what happened was he closed on the Saturday and I saw him quite some time later. And I said, so what'd you do? He said, I closed on Saturday. And I said, okay. I said, what happened to sales? He said, actually, they went down a little bit. I said, well, what about your net profit? He said, well, I didn't really look at that. It wasn't financial management training we were doing. He said, I never looked at that. It was a 2-day class. And he came to the session the next day. He said, well, here's my financials. And he said, guess what? My net profit is up. So who cares if your gross sales are down if your net profit is up? Because he wasn't paying the overtime, his expenses were less, and he was actually making more money. So if all you do is focus on sales and you think, yeah, I closed on Saturday, but my sales went down, but you don't look at the bigger picture of your net profit. Sales are important, but there could be sales without any profit in it at all. I mean, you talk about, debt, like for example, the US, they say there's a $20 trillion debt. I don't know what it is in Canada, but what do you think the sales are, the revenue for the IRS in the United States? What's the revenue that Revenue Canada collects in Canada? I have no idea. It's a huge amount of money, but there's no money left over. They're spending more than they have. In most governments, that's the way it works. So don't pay attention to what your sales are. If you're in debt or you're going backwards, then you need to figure out what you need to do to increase the bottom line. The second is increasing gross profit. And there's a big difference between markup and gross profit. And I'm going to be in the next session showing you some calculators. Actually, we'll probably get into it in this session. And the biggest difference is the difference between markup and gross profit. Kevin, you were with me in the class in Renfrew and then Ottawa. Do you remember how many people? I asked you to track how many different answers we had. Do you remember that?
Yep, I did write them down. The first class, I think we had 19 attending shops, right? There was a few more people with all the sales reps and everything, but out of the 19, I think we had 17 different answers. Or Is that what you're looking for, is how many different answers did we get?
Exactly. Now, it makes sense that you would have two answers because some people did markup and gross profit, and in fact is, and I don't exaggerate, that one class that I did, or maybe it was Sudbury. You weren't at that one. Anyway, it was the first time in my entire career that I only had two answers. I've never, ever, ever had everybody get the same answer. That has never happened. And it didn't matter if there were some bookkeepers in the room as well or some parts people in the room. I would safely say that at least 80% of shop owners have never been shown the difference between markup and gross profit. This is not intelligence. This is simply knowledge. I mean, you either know this or you don't. So here's the question. If you purchased a part for $75 and you want a 50% gross profit on that part, how much would it sell for? Now, I'm not going to just take the time. You could pause this if you want and come up with your own answer. But a lot of people would take that $75, and you can pause here if you want. A lot of people will take the $75 and say, okay, 50% of that, and then add that 50% to the 75, which is what, 37.50?
Excuse me, Kelly?
Yes.
You timed out there for a moment. I heard the request, which was if you had a product that cost $75, but then you timed out. We weren't able to hear you. Could you repeat that, please?
Thank you. I appreciate that. You purchase a part for $75 and you want a 50% gross profit. Well, a lot of people would take the $75 and take 50% of that and add it on and sell it for that amount. But that's markup. That's not gross profit. So to make it simple, let's just take a simple $100 item. You bought a part for $100 and you want a 50% gross profit. Well, what a lot of people do, not everybody, but a lot would say, okay, 100, 50% of 100 is 150. So I'm going to sell it for $150. Gross profit is what you get. It's not the calculation. In reality, gross profit is a noun. Markup is a verb. Markup is what you do. Gross profit is what you get. And when you look at your income statement and the samples we're going to show you, the word markup does not show up there at all. Now, if you have a program, I should say, like QuickBooks or MYOB or whatever financial software, in the background, you can say, this is what I want markup or this is what I want gross profit. But on an income statement, there's nothing that shows markup. It only shows gross profit. Gross profit is simply the amount of money that's left after you paid for what you sold. So if you bought the part, for example, again, $100, and you sold it for $150, which is 50% of 100, you collected $150. But you are paying, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there for a second. It happens. You sold the part for $150, you have to pay $100 for it. So you sent a check to your vendor for $100. Well, you only collected a portion of that, which if you do the math is only 33% that you kept. Gross profit is how much you were left with after you paid for what you sold. In reality, what you need to do is you need to double that amount, and you sold it for $200. You paid $100 for it, you're left with $100. So $100 that you kept is 50% of what you sold it for. So looking at big picture, if you look at your income statement and your part sales were $75,000, then your cost of that should have been about 50% of that. Or if your parts purchases were $100,000, you spent $100,000 on parts, you should have paid or sold them for approximately $200,000. Now, again, markup is what you do. Gross profit is what you get. Markup is the calculation. Gross profit is what you're left with. And we'll make that even a little bit more clear when we go through the income statement. So some people will have the answer here of the 75 plus 50% of the 37.50 and sell it for that amount. That's not the right answer. In reality, a $75 part would have to sell for $150, so doubling that. I used to say when in doubt, double it. But in some cases, like if it's an engine, you're not going to double it. You're not going to double tires. But some of the areas that are smaller, you're going to see in the matrix, need to sell at 70% gross profit, 80% gross profit, and we'll get into more detail with that later on. But if you did sell this $75 part for $150, you paid $75 to your vendor, you're left with $75, which is 50% of what you sold it for, $150. The third is to decrease expenses, and there's really only these three. And of these three, increasing sales, increase gross profit, decrease expenses, which is the easiest? it's usually increasing gross profit. Now, if your gross profit benchmarks are already there, then maybe increasing sales is going to be your best. But for most people, it's about increasing gross profit. And I'll give you an example of that. I had a lady in a workshop years ago in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and she came to the first class and she said, you know, Kelly, we're so busy. We're gonna increase our labor rate because we need to slow down, and if we're more expensive, less people will come to see us. And I said, well, if you go up, don't expect to slow down anytime soon, because, and I've seen it happen, people increase the labor rate after the class, and then one of the employees or somebody will say, oh, it slowed down after you did that. Well, guess what? We have peaks and valleys all the time. Some months are better than others. Some weeks are better than others. You will have peaks and valleys at a $50 an hour labor rate. You will have peaks and valleys at a $100 an hour labor rate. You will have peaks and valleys at $114 an hour. And then things pick up and they go, okay, maybe that wasn't what it was. I had one fellow said, yeah, after I increased my labor rate, it slowed down. Oh, really? How many of your customers figured out in the last 2 weeks that your labor rate increased? What percentage of your customers did you see of all your database in that 2-week period? So this lady, that's what she was going to do. She was going to increase her labor rate to slow down. I saw her a month later in Fort Wayne. I said, how did it go? She said, well, I'm increasing the labor rate $10 an hour. She said, we liked it. I said, can you see the difference in your bank account? And she said, yes. I said, but did it slow down? Oh, she said, no. She said, we're still busy turning away work. A month later, I go back to Fort Wayne, Indiana, doing a training class, 2 days. And I said, okay, what have you done differently? And training does not increase the success of your business. Implementation of the training does. What have you done differently? The lady said, I increased my labor rate another $10. And I'll never forget it. A guy sitting beside her, he was wearing glasses, and he took his glasses off and dropped them onto his workbook and turned to her and said, how in the hell did you go up another $10? And she said, I went to my computer and changed it. How long does it take to increase gross profit? It doesn't cost a dime. Now, you could eventually price yourself out of the market. That's not what we're talking about. But when you take a look at what the average labor rate is now in Canada or the US or any other country, you will find that we have not increased to keep up with the cost of living. So, Kevin, I've got you here. You're going to talk a little bit about the whole area of decreasing expenses, please.
Thank you, Kelly. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I have a background as a parts supplier, and often I'll get shops that will come back from financial management training, or they'll decide the bookkeeper gave them the financial statements and they want to review where they're at and where their profits are going. One of the things that I'm really going to urge you to look at is your parts supplier is not a way to look at your expense, where you buy your parts. And Kelly and I have done some training together, and this usually comes up, so I suggested let's just get this out of the way early on. So one of the things that I just wanted to be clear on is that when, as a parts supplier, you have a partner, you have somebody who is going to bring you the first and efficient product. They're going to bring you the greatest training that's available in the marketplace. They are going to be the part and partner. Their whole goal is to help you sell more parts. If at the end of the day, if you were to shop every single part that you bought from your supplier A, we're just going to say supplier A against supplier B, not one vendor can be 12, 15, even 8% out of the marketplace. The market will not allow that. The industry is just way too competitive. So what I wanted to discuss was, I really would urge you not to look to your supplier as your number one thing that you want to decrease your expenses. Oh, you got to buy the filters better. Oh, you got to buy your brake pads at a better cost. It's irrelevant in the grand scheme of what we're going to show you and we're going to talk about. And Kelly's example is going to go right into that. But I wanted to clear the table right up front and just say, we could spend all the time that we've talked so far just talking about parts suppliers and parts revenue and gross profit dollars and how that comes from. I just want to encourage you that that is not the answer. You are stepping over dollars to pick up nickels. Is there lines that you maybe need to renegotiate with your vendor that you're going to start buying more of? You're going to expand into getting into cleaning, car wash, and you're going to buy some sundry type products like that, and you want to sit down with your parts store or your vendor and renegotiate how you're buying and the volume that you're going to buy? Absolutely. I always think that's a great idea. I really want to encourage you, put that on hold. That is not where the dollars are going to come from. And Kelly, I think your example is just going to hit this point home. I'm willing to be available and I'm willing to contribute also. But if you were to take all of your part slips for an entire month, sit down with your competitor, the competitive parts store in your area, hand them every single invoice. This was an exercise I would do, and I would put everything in a column, what they bought from their existing vendor, and I would put in the column on the right everything if they bought it from me. Because service will, you get a parts store that's going to service you, handle your warranties, take care of your cores, service you as you need to get the cars in and get them out, pre-order the inventory, send the parts back without any handling charges. That is the part and partner you're going to want. And I think Kelly's point is going to bring this full circle, and I'm happy to expand on it further as we go on, Kelly, if you feel that my point isn't valid enough or isn't clear enough.
Okay, thank you. I love your perspective being from a parts person because you see things from the other side, right? Here's what I would say. If I was doing a class right now for whatever part vendor out there, and I said, if your customer that's putting on this class right here, right now, increased their rate across the board, everything tomorrow, every line item went up 10%, most of you would make more money. And if they decided today to decrease it by 10, now not put it up by 10 and decrease it back, that's not what I mean. But if they took all their prices today, all their line items, and reduced it by 10%, most of you would make less money. You need to go from cost and mark it up accordingly. And I had a fellow, you were in that class, Kevin, and he said, yeah, no. He said, it's click, click, click. And I said, you know, it's not click, click, click. I understand what you're saying. You can see that information really quickly. We didn't have that benefit when I was writing service, but actually it could work against you. You can spend so much time comparing prices one to another and forgetting about the loyalty. The example I'll use, and I'll do this really quickly, is flying. When I started flying all over the U.S., I decided to become loyal. I became a massive, massive fan of Delta. And Delta treated me so well as a platinum flyer, that's over 100 flights a year, that it was almost painful. No, it was painful to fly anybody else. And I wouldn't fly anybody else. It didn't matter about the fare. It was like, when's Delta going? When's Delta going? Now, if they only had a first class seat available and I could get another, I mean, that would happen once in a while, but it was Delta, Delta, Delta. And I don't exaggerate, I had over 500,000 miles with Delta. And I was flying like crazy. And another guy who did what I do, another counterpart of mine, he phoned me one day. He said, oh, I got to go to Atlanta. He said, you have points with Delta? And I said, well, don't you? He said, yeah, but I don't have enough. He needed 25,000. And I said, well, what do you mean? You fly as much as I do. But here's what he was doing. He'd fly a little bit with Delta, a little bit with Alaska, a little bit with American, a little bit with United, a little bit with Air Canada, a little bit with WestJet. He had a lot of miles, but he had taken his loyalty and divided it out. And I said, how often are you in first class? He said, I'm hardly ever in first class. I was in first class, no exaggeration, over 90% of the time. Now, within the US or Canada, the first class is not what it is when you're flying overseas. It's better. I mean, you get better seat and meal, etc. But the point was that I had that. And we get to the airport, and I would get to go to the big shot lineup instead of the regular lineup, so I'd get through the airport quicker. They put priority tags on your luggage. They put priority, which I think means they lose your luggage faster than anybody else's. And then you got access to the lounges. So when you get to the airport, you go into the lounge and you can have a meal and you can work, and they got computers there and offices in some. Well, when you're not a big shot, you don't have a chance to do that. The point was that I spent probably as much on airfare as he did, but I chose to be loyal. And I'm not doing a plug for Delta, but I love that airline. If I had to fly somebody else and I'd be sitting on a plane and I'd look out the window and see a Delta plane, I called them my buddies. Why? Because they really took care of me. But when you divide your loyalty with your part vendor and you don't have enough that you spent to go on that cruise, you don't have enough to do whatever little extra. My thinking is the more loyal you are, the bigger hammer that you have, and the better those people are going to take care of you. Back to the guy in the class, Kevin, you were there, and he said, yeah, but it's click, click, click. And I know what he means. I can look, click, click, and see that. But you have to mentally or write down or jig it in your mind, that part was this much, and I could have sold it for this much. Now this part here is less, and then you have to remember. Now, what some people do is they take the cheaper part and then they mark it up the same way as another part, and I disagree with that. If I'm going to buy a lower quality part, I'm not going to get the same gross profit I would on a higher quality part. That's not fair to the customer. One other shop I was at, they said, well, here's what happens. Any part over $50, we need to check 3 separate vendors. And I thought, what a complete waste of time. So here was an advisor. In those days, it was making phone calls, and it's not quite click, 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 but it is easier on the computer. I'm not going to dispute that. But it's still a time-consuming process. And sometimes you try to make more money in selling parts, and you sacrifice quality. Sometimes it's not the same quality. Service, you may have to wait longer, or the service from the vendor, the crews, etc., that you can work towards, or sometimes the delivery, it's going to take longer because it had to come from farther away. My point is stay loyal and get loyal. And I want to use one example of decreasing expenses. I've seen some people that are so cheap they squeak. We're talking about picking up rice after weddings. So there's a piece, there's a piece, there's a piece. We're talking cheapskates. And the problem with that is the whole focus is on what can I do to save money, what can I do to save money? And if they took the creativity that they've used to try to reduce expenses, like, oh yeah, well, I turn off my lights in the bays at lunchtime, that'll save you some money, but how much? If you take your paper from your printer and you think I'm going to put it in my fax machine backwards, now that's not as big of a deal because we don't use fax as much, but some people will take and put it back in their printer and they say they're saving money. And I've done the math, Kevin. If you're really good and you're doing that like every day and you're focused on, yes, we're going to print on the back side of that paper, the problem with that too is you're looking at a sheet of paper and it's got printing on both sides. You think, okay, which one was I trying to keep here, this one or this one? Anyway, I won't get into more detail on that. I could, but I won't. And if you do a really good job, you do that every day, you're really focused on that, I'm thinking, Kevin, you could save maybe $5 a year. And when we were teaching that class, and this was a really good point, one guy was complaining to his vendor that his parts were too expensive. And I know a guy who was a parts salesman like you did, Kevin. He was tired of people saying, you're too expensive, you're too expensive. But understand, those customers are doing the same thing with other vendors. Sometimes you're cheaper and they're more expensive. So what he did is he took 50 line items and compared. Yeah, some are higher, lower. Every part vendor out there can't contact every other part vendor that day and find out what they're charging and adjust their pricing. They would spend half their day just doing that and not actually focus on selling parts. So he said, yeah, some items were higher or lower. This went through. He said, but at the end of it, it was minuscule. The difference between all of the vendors was down to literally dollars between them all. So don't waste your time trying to reduce your expenses by shopping for parts. And there was one guy in that class, Kevin, you saw him, he was adamant. And he said, I spend $200,000 a year and they're going to make sure that price is better. How much time is he spending to find out that that vendor is more expensive on this part but less on that part? And I looked at him and I wanted to move on. I said, sir, we're talking about putting paper into your printer backwards. The way to make more money in this industry is not doing what you're doing. That might help you a little bit, but the time that you spent is a waste of time. But if you focus on selling your labor, that's where the money is going to be. Okay, so let's move on. Thank you for your input there, Kevin. I want to show you a story, and I just did a little bit of extra things here while Kevin was talking there. Kevin, thank you. I'm going to tell the story of 3 shop owners. And these are all in the same city. And, people are listening to this from all across the U.S. In fact, as we have a fellow who's become quite a fan of the training, he's in the UK. And here's what I've heard. And again, I've traveled all across Canada and all 50 states, been all of them. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard, yes, but it's different here. Yes, but it's different here. Yes, it's different here. It's different here. I've heard that well over 1,000 times, maybe 5,000. I don't know, a lot. And I know it's going to come up, so I try to nip it in the bud right away. Give you an example. I was training in Nanaimo, British Columbia, Canada. It's on Vancouver Island. And this guy said to me that was in the class, he said, have you ever been to Nanaimo before? I said, yes, sir, I have. He said, then you know that it's different here. And I said, why is it different in Nanaimo? And he looked at me and said, we have price-conscious people here. And I looked at him and said, that's where they went? I said, I was wondering where they went because they disappeared from all these other cities that I'm training in. People are saying, oh, the cheapskates are not here anymore. I don't know where they went. Oh, they all moved to Nanaimo. Everybody listening to this has cheapskate customers. There are people who are cheap, 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 cheap. They want used parts. They want to bring in their own parts. They want to get used tires. They want to beat you down in your price. Whatever it is, there are cheapskates everywhere. According to J.D. Power and Associates, 12% of our customers as independent repair shops are cheapskates. Don't worry about that. Cars are cars and people are people. And I've heard people say it's different in a big city, it's different in a small town, it's different in a medium-sized town. I had somebody in Red Deer, Alberta, Canada, which is a medium-sized town of 100,000 people. And I was training there and the guy said, yeah, I know, but you do a lot of big city stuff, don't you? I said, yeah. And he said, so then you know that it's different, or maybe you don't know, he said, that it's different in a medium-sized city. He said, you know, some of the stuff will work in a small town because they can't go to the big city or won't take the time, and can't, you know, maybe it'll work in a big city because people don't care, but in a medium-sized city it doesn't work. We're stuck in the middle, he said. And I said, what's the name of your shop? Malcolm in the Middle's Auto Repair? Again, I've heard many, many times, it's different here, it's different here, it's different here. I think the reason people say it's different is they're trying to find an excuse why they aren't doing what other people are doing. I'll give you another quick example. My brother, his name's Dean, he sells paint. And he was working for a paint company in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and he was the top salesman of the year. He was the top salesman the first year, the second year, the third year. He was winning cruises like crazy. Other people started to complain, and every part vendor out there can relate to this. Their market's different, their market's different, their market's different. They got something that I don't have, and that's why they do better. So they looked at his territory and they thought, you know what, you might be onto something here. The lower mainland of British Columbia is quite large. They took away half of his territory and gave it to somebody else, and he won the top salesman the fourth year and the fifth year. Other salespeople said, it's still too big of a territory, and they took another third of his territory away, and he won the sixth year and the seventh year, and they came to the conclusion that Dean Bennett knows how to sell paint. That's what he knew. One of my clients, his name is Mike Kelly, and he's actually a trainer that works with me as well, and you know him really well, Kevin. He owned 14 Midas stores in British Columbia, Canada. And the top store that was doing incredible dollars, the other people say, yeah, well, we see their numbers, but they've got it made because they're in a rich neighborhood, yada, yada, yada. What he would do is take that top salesperson and put them into a lower performing store and watch starting day one how much the sales would increase. And he proved it to them that you think it's your area, and I'm thinking it's management. Now, the area might have a little bit to do with it. Like if you're in an area and all of a sudden the government deploys 20,000 soldiers off to the Middle East or something, yeah, that's going to affect you. But for the most part, it's just an excuse. Business is business and people are people. So here's a situation. We have 3 shop owners all in the same city. And I'll just say it that way so it is totally fair. We can't use that bogus excuse that I just mentioned. There's a guy named Dustin, and his sales in an average month are about 61,000. I'm not talking about the best month he's ever had. I'm saying that on average he's about 61,000. Kendra operates a shop in the exact same city, and she does on average of 85,000 a month. And then there's Scott, and he operates in the same city, and he does about 114,543. So in a session that's live, I'll ask people, what is the difference? Well, oftentimes they say, well, Scott has more technicians. Obviously, he's a bigger shop. And that's not accurate. Dustin has 3 technicians, Kendra has 3 technicians, and Scott has 3 technicians. Well, they go, well, the labor rate's higher. Well, no, these shops know each other. They're all in the same group, and they are all the exact same labor rate. They're $101 an hour each at this time. So that's not it. Somebody said maybe the gross profit's higher. Maybe they're better expense manager, which has nothing to do with sales. In fact, as the better expense manager, probably the less your sales are because you're spending time trying to figure out how to save money rather than how to bring in new money. The shops all have the exact same labor rate, the same number of technicians. What's the difference? And I'm going to go through this really quickly. We are going to spend more time on it in the future. And that is this. Dustin, Kendra, and Scott, 3 technicians each. And in an average month, your average technician is there 168 hours a month. So with 3 technicians, that's 504. So Dustin has about 504 hours of labor inventory that he has. Kendra has 504, Scott has 504, 3 technicians, about 168 hours a month, which is basically 5 days a week, 4.2, 4.3 weeks in the average month. Some have a little bit more, 19 days, some have, less 19, some have 21, 22, once in a while, 20, whatever. It changes, but the average is 504. The difference is how much time they spend working on cars and how much faster they are at it. And when we get into future sessions, we're going to come back to this and we're going to take a look at the fixes. How do you get from where you're at to where you need to be? And I'll make this very clear. Productivity is how much time you spend working on cars. Efficiency is how fast you are. So in Dustin's shop, they only spend 60% of the day working on stuff that makes money. Kendra spends 75% of the day, their technicians, and Scott's shop spend 90. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but the highest your productivity could be is 100%. Kevin, if I'm working for you and I'm there for 8 hours, and you say, Kelly, how much time did you spend today working on cars? 10 hours, 11 hours. That sounds good, Kelly, but that's not possible. If I'm at your shop for 8 hours, I cannot possibly spend more than 8 hours working on cars. I can't. The highest it could possibly be is 100, and we can't expect 100. You would have to have non-smoking technicians, and they'd have to wear catheters so they didn't have to do that stuff. That's not going to happen. 90% is our benchmark. The question is, where are you at? Where should you be, and how do you get there? And of course, we can't get into all the detail on the very first session of this. This is why it's 5-part series. Efficiency is the ability to get the work done within the time allotted. The average technician is 100% efficient. That's where the time estimating guides come from. I've had people challenge that before. We'll explain that in a future session. Kendra's technicians are beating the time by about 12% on average, and Scott's are beating the time by about 25%. Why? Well, there's lots of reasons. I mean, Scott has better equipment. He's sent his technicians to more training. They pre-book more appointments. They're better at selling maintenance, which is gravy work. Dustin's shop is more of a fix-it-as-a-break shop. People come to the shop when something's already broken, whereas Scott's educated his customers about maintenance, and they're doing a lot more maintenance. Dustin's shop produces 302 hours a month, Kendra's 423, and Scott's 567. The labor rate is exactly the same. The total performance at Dustin's shop, $61,000. They do about $30,000 in labor potential. We'll explain this in more detail in the future, how we arrive at these. The parts and the extras, about half your money that comes in the door should come from labor. You're going to see that later on when we do KPIs on labor mix. And then the parts and the sublet and the tires and the towing and the shop supply should be equal to that. If you are more productive, you spend more time working on cars, and you're faster at it, you are going to sell more labor, and you are going to sell more parts and everything else that you sell. So this shop does $40,000 a month, and they're going to sell the extras to go along with that. Sorry, the $42,000 a month, labor mix 50%, so half the money came from labor, the other half came from everything else. For some of you, I know this is fast, but we're going to spend more time in detail later on. This shop did $57,000 in labor, and the parts and the extras that went along with that, again, parts, sublet, tires, towing, shop supplies, and environmental fees. Look at the difference. Scott's shop consistently is doing $53,000 a month more than this shop here. And Kevin, I told you that I saw one more thing, and I've been teaching this a long time. A couple of things I want to show you is if they are hourly, Dustin pays his techs hourly, Kendra pays her techs hourly, Scott pays her techs hourly. So they are paying, all of them are paying $504 a month. Their technicians earn pretty close to the same amount. So the payroll at Dustin's shop, Kendra's shop, and Scott's shop is pretty much the same. And yet, look at the dollar difference. The point is that you're paying for 504 hours in a month. If you only sell 302, you're still paying for 504. It's not like spark plugs where you only pay for what you sold or what you bought. Scott's shop is paying for 504 hours a month, but he's getting more. He's getting 567. And one thing, and I just thought of this actually, and I've been teaching this kind of stuff for many years, but one thing I wanted to do is let's take a look, and let's say Dustin actually, and I've never seen the math, so I don't know exactly how this is going to turn out, but let's say that Dustin actually has 6 technicians. I just thought of this, Kevin. Now let's take a look at the difference here with 6 technicians. Oh, it changed them all to 6, so it won't work that way. The point would be, and maybe I can put this back to 504. I just changed the spreadsheet again to do it all the way across the board. Let's see if it's going to work. Like I said, I'm doing it for the first time. Okay, it's pretty close. So this shop actually has 6 technicians and Scott has 3. And I see this so many times where a person's doing so much in sales, somebody else is doing about the same amount in sales, and they literally have half as many people. Dustin's doing 122,000, Scott's doing 114 in sales. The challenge is that Dustin would need more than one service advisor. If he's got 6 technicians, he's probably going to have 2, maybe 3 advisors. Scott can make this work with 1, maybe 2, but most likely 1. So we're looking at dollars. We're not looking at the net profit. There's no question that Scott is going to net more from 114 than Dustin is at 122. But look at the difference, 114,000 with 3 technicians and 122 with 6 technicians, just gross sales. I'd rather have 3 techs. It's a lot easier to work with 3 techs than 6. So again, Kevin, that's something I told you about today that I thought, oh, there's another thing with the spreadsheet. There's so much that that spreadsheet can do. Anyway, moving on. I want to make this very clear because some people, if you don't know me, you've not been in one of my classes, you might think, oh, Kelly's all about money. That is not true, Kevin. You know me, you know my heart. It's not all about money. I do what I do because I love it. Kevin, I see the passion that you have. Money's important, but it's not everything. But my goal is not that you overcharge. My goal is not that you become the most expensive shop. My goal isn't that you get huge gross profit beyond what we believe you should get. My goal for you is so completely simple. It's to get paid for everything you do at the right amount of money. That's all we're talking about. Could you imagine if you got paid for all of the work that you do? And the question to ask yourself is, how much free work has your shop given away in the history of your shop? I've asked this question to tens of thousands of people, and I've had some people say way too much. I give away a lot. And we had that argument. You saw that in Kevin, where people say, but if you do this for free and if you do that for free, they'll come back. The example they gave is, I got a customer spending $10,000 a year. How many of those are there? In training, Kevin, you see it. People go to the extreme. They go, instead of the norm, they talk about the exception rather than the rule. And yeah, if I have a customer spending 10 grand a year, I'm going to put in some wiper blades for them, no problem. But that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is what we call the PLO, the parking lot opinion, where a customer comes to the shop, they come in, they tell you what the car's doing or not doing. You go out to the car, open up the hood, and now you're working on the car, on the lot, doing a parking lot opinion and not charging them for that. The point is simple. How much work have you done, you or your technicians, that you didn't charge the customer for what area? We're not talking about whether you give away a wiper blade or not. And in that class, I thought you're talking about putting paper in fax machines backwards again. Please don't focus on that. Yes, you will do some things for free for people because they're loyal and you reward them for their loyalty. Let's go back to the example I gave you of Delta. I flew Delta over 100 times a year for over 10 years. Okay, I was a platinum flyer with them. And let's say I have flown them thousands of times, and I think I've flown like 2,400 flights in my life, something crazy like that. And I've flown Delta 120 flights, and Kevin, you've never flown Delta. You don't know them, you've never flown them, you're a United guy. So I go to buy a ticket from Delta and you go to buy a ticket from Delta. Who should get a cheaper ticket? Neither one of us. It's going to be the same. I go to the website, I don't put in a code that shows how much I spend. You're going to pay what I'm going to pay. Whatever flights are available that day we want to fly, our fare is going to be the same. The difference is, when we get to the airport, I'm going to get the shorter line, which is going to save me time. I'm not exaggerating. I was what they called super elite with Air Canada, and I only did it 2 years in a row because I didn't travel a lot within the country. I flew a lot outside the country in the U.S. Super elite literally means this. I would go to the airport. I didn't have to go to the counter at all. There was a little obscure office around the corner. I would go there. My boarding pass would already be printed. The luggage tags would already be printed. They would take my luggage to the thing. I would never even touch it. They would just take my luggage, put it on the belt. And if there was a lineup at security, they would escort me to the beginning of the lineup. And same thing with customs. One day I was there, the customs lineup was insane. They brought me to the beginning of the lineup. I had one guy give me the finger, like, who the heck are you? I'm just somebody who's loyal. That's all I am. I'm a person who's loyal, and they're taking care of me. And then you get access to the lounge, and you get, you know, all those things. And they reward you, yes, because you get free flights, because you earned them. The difference is simple. I believe in rewarding people because they're loyal, but I don't believe in giving them free things so they will become loyal. Financial management, on to the next part of this. There are 3 major financial statements. There's an income statement, or what they call a profit and loss statement. Sometimes they call it a statement of earnings. I don't know why accountants can get it so complicated. It's really just one of these. Now, it's actually kind of funny because they call it an income statement, and yet when you look at your income statement, there's a lot more lines on the income statement that are expense items than income. The other thing, they call it a profit and a loss statement. I give them a hard time about that too, because it can't be both. It's profit or loss, but they call it profit and loss. Excuse me, you don't have a profit and a loss at the same time, but let's leave the accountants alone and just call it an income statement. And then there's the balance sheet, and then there's the cash flow statement. The income statement is the one you're going to use the most. You're going to look at it quite frequently. Balance sheet, once a month is good, and definitely at the end of the year. And a cash flow statement is certainly not something you need to look at every single day, something that you probably would look at on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. Isn't that funny? Did you see that pop up? It was a Facebook thing from Kevin. Income statement reflects sales in dollars. It reflects your cost of goods sold, what you paid for what you sold. It reflects your gross profit in dollars, how much is left after you paid for what you sold. It includes your expenses, including depreciation. That should be on your income statement, and it should show it in dollars and percentage, and the net profit dollars and percentage. I can assure you that most people do not have percentages on their income statements. Most people who bring an income statement to me for the first time, it's dollars only. And that is not quite useless, but not that helpful. You want to make sure, if you've got QuickBooks or whatever program, that you go in, it's in Preferences in QuickBooks, and you can put percentage of sales. What we want to see is a percentage of sales. So now every time you print off the income statement, it's going to show the percentages. You don't manage your business with dollars. Dollars is what you take to the bank, and dollars is what you pay for your vendors with, but you manage the business by percentage. So make sure the percentages are always there, whether you do it yourself on your own income statement or your accountant. And I'm stunned, literally stunned. It doesn't matter if your accountant looks after 10 different kinds of industries. Percentages are important to any business. How much money came in the door, what percentage went to my food costs, what percentage went to my rent, what percentage went to whatever. So I personally think it's laziness, personally, when people don't put the percentages there. Some accountants say, well, I like, the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. That's not enough data to run your business with. Bottom line is you want the percentages there. And that's that little thing that I put over on the right-hand side there. And then the net profit dollars. Now, what I do want to show you here, and then I'm going to get some input from Kevin, income statements don't show you everything. And I've never taught it this way up until the session I did just, GPS session I did just recently in Ottawa. I wanted to show what an income statement doesn't show, because I believe it'll help show why there needs to be a balance sheet. And it'll show why there needs to be a cash flow statement. There's 3 separate statements. And if you don't pay attention, particularly to the balance sheet, you're only looking at a small piece of the pie. You're not looking at the big picture. I had a fellow who was in a management group, and he was doing the income statement analysis every single month. It was a group, I just know who the group is. And he phoned me one day and he said, Kelly, he said, I need help. I'm at my wit's end. I don't know if I should sell this thing. I want to shut it down. My wife hates my business. My kids think I'm always there. I'm never home. They say when you start a business, you only have to work half a day. Well, 12 hours a day is a half a day. I've had some people say 12 hours a day. I'm still putting in 14 or 16. I mean, at the beginning, maybe it makes sense. But if you've been in business for 6, 8, 10, 12 years, working 14, 16 hours a day is just ludicrous. It doesn't have to happen. Manage it differently, and you're going to not only make more money, but you're going to reduce your stress as well. Anyway, his name's Peter. And Peter said, Kelly, I look at my income statement every month, and I'm making money, but I don't have any money. Have you ever sat down with your accountant, and the income statement says you made $14,000 net profit last month, and you look at your bank account and it's overdrawn, and you go, show me the money. I actually wrote a workshop years ago called Show Me the Money. Show me the money. If you say I made $14,000, that should be in my bank account, but I made $14,000 last month, which just was yesterday, and now I'm looking at my bank account and I'm overdrawn by $6,000. Show me the money. Well, the balance sheet shows you the money. That's what it does. Income statements don't show receivables. So if you've done work for somebody and you've invoiced them, a fleet customer, let's say, well, that doesn't show up in your bank account. It shows in your income statement, I made this money. but it doesn't show up in the bank account because you haven't realized that money yet. That's the term that the accountants use. You haven't realized it. So money that's owed to you for work that you've already done. Income statements don't show payables. It doesn't show how much money you owe to your part vendor. It doesn't show how much money you owe to anybody else you owe money to. So money owed to vendors for goods or services that you've already acquired. Debt. It doesn't show debt at all, short-term or long-term loans, credit, card debt, lines of credit, back to Peter. When I was talking to Peter that day, I said, Peter, can you please send me your balance sheet? And he faxed it to me. It was a few years ago. And I looked at his balance sheet and I was stunned. I was almost in tears really because I know Peter, he's a neat guy. I hadn't seen him in a few years actually. And I phoned him. I said, Peter, I don't know how you're still in business. He had so much debt in that business. He had tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt that he was using for cash flow for the business. He would actually take his own personal credit card, run it through his machine so he can get a $500 sale to put it into the bank so he can make payroll the next day. And I know what that's like. I know what it's like to cash in retirement stuff in Canada, RSPs. I know what it's like to go to the bank, cash in money that I've got for savings so I can make payroll for the next day. I'm not unaware. I'm aware of that. And an income statement doesn't show you that. Your income statement doesn't show your inventory. It doesn't show you how much you have in parts or tires or shop supplies or anything. It does not show any assets, anything you own, your building, your equipment, your computers, anything. It doesn't show any of that. And it doesn't show your liabilities, money that is owed to vendors or creditors. It doesn't show any of that. So I wanted to make it clear, and again, this is something I just started thinking about how I can show it differently, because a lot of people think, well, why do I need a balance sheet? Because the income statement doesn't show everything. And now, Kevin, I'd like to get some input from you about this and some neat things that you bring to the table about this.
So, you know, at the last class when you were discussing this, something that really just jumped out at me is how many times I talk to my shops and I'm working with them, and just things that don't come into that when they're running a successful business, everything looks great, and we start talking about, I ask them about, you know, revolving debt. You just mentioned, you know, taking advances to pay payroll. One of the things that credit card loans, you know, something that's become popular that I don't recommend, that I do not like, is that shops now are taking advances on credit card sales, and they're basically going in and getting the money up front from the card vendor and then restricting their cash flow based on the way they're paying it back. They're basically taking a suicide loan. They're taking loans from the credit card company based on the transaction purchases that they're going to buy in the future, and that's how they're going to pay that loan back. So when I'm talking with shops and I hear that they're doing these kinds of behavior, that doesn't show up on an income statement. So if I was thinking about purchasing that business, I would never see that there was a $40,000, $60,000 suicide loan that's getting paid back on a credit card. So one of the things that came out of that I was concerned with, you know, as we continue to talk about it, I have shops that have leases. You know, they have a lease for their shop software or their hardware, and they basically are borrowing the money from the lease company, and they're taking the payments over an amortized period of time, and that debt doesn't show from their income statement. You don't know that the software that they're using and the computer that they have is basically making a monthly payment. So one of the things that to me it just jumped out was the suicide loans or the credit card loans that you take. There's no way of knowing that, so the health or the how well the business is doing is not visible. And that was one of the things I was asking you about on sites with you doing them, Kelly, is just for that financial literacy to teach shops. You know, if I'm going to buy this store and I'm going to expand or take it over, what are some of the tools that they really want to look at, like a checklist, to make sure to know the vitality or the health of the business that they're buying without those examples? I really think people make short-sighted financial decisions without really taking all those things into consideration.
You know, Kevin, I'd not heard that before about the credit card advances, and they won't tell you I've heard what the interest rate is. It's actually what you said to me was worse than those payroll loan places. I know a guy who lives on payroll loans, and it's just incredible. It's 40% interest every 2 weeks. If you borrow the money today, but you're getting paid tomorrow, you got to pay it back tomorrow. So it's 40% for 1 day or 40% for 2 weeks maximum, 80% a month. And it's insane. And you said it's even higher for that, which blows my mind. And by the way, when I brought this up in Ottawa, because I'd not heard this before, we had, how many people say, yeah, we get calls about that all the time. We can lend you money. We can lend you money. And they won't tell you what interest rate. That's what the people said. Okay, moving on
Yep.
to the next page. We have about 30 minutes left. Income statement should be prepared monthly, quarterly, and annually. That's pretty straightforward. Accrual versus cash basis. And I'm covering this because there's people that take this training from Canada and the US. And there's a difference between Canada and the US. We say A and Americans say, huh? So, I worked in the U.S. for years. We just got to tell you, it got to make some fun too, have some fun. But I was training in California, Kevin. This is going back 20 some years ago. And I was working in the U.S. and this guy said, hey, Kelly. I said, yeah. He said, you're from Canada, eh? I said, yeah, I'm from Canada, huh? And he said, we got more people in Southern California than you've got in your whole country. And I said, and this is a good thing? He said, yeah, you do have a point there. Anyway, I love both countries. Truly, I do. Anyway, accrual versus cash basis. The difference is simple. In Canada, the law says you must operate by accrual, which simply means if you did work, let's say I did work for Kevin, and he has a fleet of customers, a fleet of vehicles that I look after, and I've done work, and I've given him an invoice of $5,000. Now, he may not pay that for 30, 60, not knowing Kevin, he would never go 90, but some people do, as you know. They lean on the trade, it's called. That means that I need to pay the tax on that money, and I mean, PST or GST or state tax or whatever tax we're talking about. You need to pay that in Canada whether you've collected that money or not. Now, the upside of that is that if I do work for somebody else, sorry, they do work for me, it helps in your favor because you don't have to claim, well, you do have to claim it. Sorry, I've got that backwards. So the point is whether you've actually realized the money or not, whether you've paid it or not, or it's been paid to you or not, I should say, you need to pay the tax on that. Now in the US, it's different. You can operate your business with a cash basis. I know there's some laws that, say how often you're allowed to change that. I don't know how often you can change that, but I do want to make it clear that in the U.S., if you're on a cash basis situation, that means that even if I've done the work and I've got an invoice for $5,000, I don't have to pay the tax on that. And let's say it's now at the end of the year and we're talking about income tax. In Canada, if my year end is December 31st, and I'm now paying my tax for January, or in January for December, whatever period of time I have, that means that even if I haven't collected money, I need to pay the income tax on that in addition to the federal tax or state tax, I should say, or provincial tax, I should say. Whereas in the US, you have a choice not to do that. And again, it's not back and forth. A really neat way to understand how this works is if you've got, let's say, QuickBooks, and you go to take a look at an income statement. In Canada, it's going to default it to accrual, but you do have a chance to look at it as a cash basis. And I've done that with people before and say, here's the difference between accrual and cash basis. Go to your QuickBooks oh, thank you, sir. I don't have my screen on. Thank you. It's awesome having somebody on this with me. Accrual versus cash basis. And I just lost my train of thought there for a second. Where was it going with this, Kevin?
I think you were just explaining the difference between it at the end of the year that you can make the changes if you're in the U.S. and how you're going to.
Yeah, thank you. So I've asked people to switch it from cash basis to accrual. You would think you were looking at a completely separate company because the payables and the receivables are no longer a factor if it's cash basis. So if you just want to see the difference, particularly for those of you that are in a place like the US or other countries where you can do cash basis, then take a look at accrual cash basis. There are times that cash basis will work in your favor. There are times that accrual will work in your favor. So I don't need to get into more detail on that. That's the kind of stuff your accountant helps you with, but I did want to mention that these income statements can be done either accrual or cash basis. In Canada, you have no choice. You must report by accrual. Next, income statement preparation. It depends on the shop management system that you have for the bookkeeping software. Creating an income statement should be pretty simple. Some people, their accounting system is is antiquated. Some people are actually running their business with QuickBooks. They're using that as a shop management software, which I totally don't recommend. I love QuickBooks. I've been using it for over 20 years, but it doesn't manage your business. That's not what it's for. It's not going to do your emails out to your customers, and there's a whole bunch of things that good shop management that will do that your accounting won't do. But if you are doing it in QuickBooks, hopefully you're going to be able to get a pretty quick income statement out of that. I do recommend that you do your own income statements. I'm not saying you don't use your accountant, but it's nice to be able to prepare your own income statement so you see it right now today. You should be able to see an income statement for your business at the end of business day on the last day of the month, or at least the first of the next day. Not everybody has that ability, but you want to see it as quickly as you can. If the information goes to your accountant or your bookkeeper, you may not see that income statement for a month or so. You want to see it as quickly as you can because you want to be able to make changes. The income statement and the chart of accounts. Now, this is new information that I've just added, is the chart of accounts. I want to talk a little bit about that, and I'll read it to you. The chart of accounts is simply a list of all the items that you like to see, what you want to see in your financial statements. Some people's income statements are way too simple, and some are way too complex. I've seen income statements where it shows sales, nothing for cost of goods sold, right into expenses. I've seen that. Now, not often, but I've seen it. I've seen some people that show labor and sales of parts together. You don't want that. Some people have labor and sublet labor separate together. You want to see that separate. Some people have parts and tires together in one category. You want that separate. So I want to show you what we believe is the best way to set up your chart of accounts. Now, some people have the chart of accounts so complicated, it's page after page after page of chart of accounts. I had one fellow who wanted to see what sales percentage was MasterCard, Visa. Well, we don't have any benchmarks on how much would be Visa or how much would be MasterCard. So the point is you want to keep it fairly simple, but you want it detailed enough so that you can see what you need to see. Typically, not always, but typically it runs in the largest numbers first. So whatever your highest sales are, which should be labor, then you want to see that one first. And I want to read what I wrote here because it's very clear. Typically runs in the order of the largest numbers, and that's in terms of dollars to the lowest. But it's not a hard and fast rule. In other words, if your labor sales, for example, are lower than your part sales, when you get your labor sales up to exceed your part sales, and they should, there's no need to change the order. So I want to make it very clear. I just thought maybe some people would think, oh, my labor sales are less than my parts, so parts should show up first. Oh, now my labor sales are higher than my part sales, so I'll change the order. You don't need to do that. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's typically the way that it's done. And one other thing I want to say is that your income statement with your income itself and your cost of goods sold should mirror image each other. In other words, if in your income statement you show labor, parts, sublet, tires, towing, shop supplies, and environmental fees, your cost of goods sold should show the exact same thing. Now, oftentimes that is the case, but I've seen income statements where it's not, where I see breakdown labor, parts, sublet, tires, towing, shop supplies, environmental fees, and cost of goods sold is one line for everything. I see that a lot, actually, too much. The problem is you can see your cost of goods sold, but if your gross profit's too low, you don't know what it is. Is it your labor gross profit that's too low? Is it your parts gross profit? Is it your tires gross profit? And that's why you don't want your tires and your parts together, because the benchmark for the gross profit is different, so you don't want them together. And it's going to get a little bit of brief input from Kevin here, and then I'm going to move on to what a income statement should look like.
Just, for myself, the thing I wanted to add to that, Kelly, was that analysis paralysis will kill you. If you can't get a chart of accounts from your bookkeeper, your accountant, then get one that you can use. Because just for what Kelly was addressing there, where all these items getting piled together, when you're looking at numbers, they're just numbers on a page. It's like you're moving stacks of money over and you can't begin to understand what it is that you're looking at. In a basic format, even for Gemcar, we provide a basic chart of accounts for just that reason, that we're going to pull those numbers out and at least outline them for you so you have a chance to review it and be like, well, that doesn't reflect my numbers that I get at the end of the month. No problem. I'm not saying that this number's right and that number's wrong. But without a chart of accounts or a general ledger, you're not going to have any way to basically be able to break out those different categories or those income streams or revenue streams. In expense streams to be able to manage them. So when you first get going and you decide to do this, what I'm saying is don't let analysis paralysis get in the way. Oh, I have to wait till I get the actual chart of accounts from my accountant that I only meet with 3 times a year. Don't do that. Get your bookkeeper, grab a standard one. You could probably Google it, grab something off of Excel, and use their standard general ledger account. And the categories, you can make them fall until you can get the real good information. But please don't wait, because I ask shops all the time when I'm trying to help them configure. We'll go, 10, 20, 30 hours of training. That sometimes takes 3 months, and they still don't have their chart of account. Oh, yeah, I'm waiting for him to get back to me. Don't let that get in the way.
Okay, paralysis, what'd you say? Analysis by paralysis?
Analysis paralysis, yeah.
That's
when
really
you're
good.
Constantly
way too, overthinking stuff. Okay,
yeah.
So here is what we recommend as an ideal income statement. Now, we're not going to get into a lot of detail. That's part of what we're looking at next time and how to start to analyze this. Some of this is very rudimentary for some people. Some people are seeing this kind of information for the first time. As I mentioned, your income category should match your cost of goods sold. So income, we want to be able to see your labor, your parts, your sublet, your tires, shop supplies. Now, as far as environmental fees or miscellaneous, that's only if you're doing some of those. If you, for example, rent out one of your bays to a detail company, or some people buy and sell cars, or you sell parts over the counter, so you can use a miscellaneous category for that. Now, I don't really like miscellaneous categories. Some people will put $28,000 miscellaneous. What is that? So if it's a lot of money, then you want to make sure that you actually call it what it is. So if you do sell parts over the counter, you could just take off that miscellaneous and put it parts over the counter. But this is the breakdown that you want. And you want to be able to see the income, and then you want to see the income for each of those categories and the gross profit. And I'm going to take a look at this page, which actually shows the benchmarks as well and the percentages. So we're going to call this Elite Auto Repair. We're going to see the income breakdown and the percentage of total sales. Now, the benchmarks that you see on the left-hand side are what we consider the benchmarks. And again, not what the average shop is doing, but what we believe you should be doing. We don't have benchmarks for all of these. That would be micromanagement, but we do have benchmarks for some of them. So labor, we would like to see your labor to be 50 to 55% of your sales. So when you look at an income statement, labor should be half of what the total sales were. And then you've got the parts, which should be 35 to 40% of your sales. Sublet, we don't have a benchmark for that. Maybe 10% if we did have one, but it depends on, what equipment you have. Maybe you have alignment equipment and you don't have to farm out the alignment. So we don't have a benchmark for that. We don't have a benchmark for tires. You may be a tire shop and sell a lot of tires. I think every single shop should sell tires. Shop supplies, we do have a benchmark there. Should be 6 to 8% of sales. Environmental fees, we do not have a benchmark for that, or any miscellaneous. That would be silly. And then the cost of goods sold. So again, mirror imaging. How much did I collect for labor? How much did I pay for labor? And this is your technician's wages. And I would say most shops, probably 80% or higher, don't show their technician's wages as a cost of goods sold, and you should. Now, I've had accountants say, well, labor is not a cost of goods sold. It's a good. It's something that needs to be tangible. I disagree. The most profitable thing that you sell is labor, and you need to know what you paid for the labor and what you sold the labor for. So your labor cost of goods sold should be about 35. Let's I put 35 to, it's actually, sorry, it should be about 35% of overall sales. Parts, we don't have a benchmark there per se. Sublet, tires, shop supplies, environmental fees, and miscellaneous. What is important is this number. The most amount of money that should go out of your door to pay for what you sold is 40 cents on the dollar, or 40%. So for every dollar that comes in the door, you're going to pay for the labor to the techs. And by the way, that's technicians' wages only. It does not include any of the payroll benefits and burdens. It's that hourly amount or monthly amount, whatever you pay. Then, of course, you paid for the parts, you paid for the sublet, and the rest of those things. After you've paid for what you sold, you should have only paid 40 cents for every dollar that came in your door. Gross profit again is how much money you're left with after you paid for what you sold. Your gross profit on labor, after you sold the labor and paid your technicians, your gross profit on the labor should be 70 to 75%. your gross profit on the part should be 50. Your gross profit on the sublet labor should be 30. And the reason I put sublet labor is we're talking about the labor only. Any parts that you bought should be included under your parts category. So when you have work done by a sublet vendor, make sure you're getting 30% gross profit on the labor portion of that and put the parts under your parts matrix, so you're going to get 50%. Shop supplies, and again, gross profit, I'm going to suggest that you don't actually take the time to track that. You could, but most people are not going to go through all their vendor invoices and say, okay, I bought these parts from this part vendor, and I bought those shop supplies that were part of that. So you could separate it. I'm not saying you shouldn't. If you're already doing it, great, continue to do it. But it's kind of a thing that you don't have to worry about right away. Sometime later on, if you're not tracking shop supplies, go through that extra step. Environmental fees, that would be crazy to do that. You'd have to know how much money on your insurance was for environmental fees, etc., and then the miscellaneous. And I'm just going to pull this up so it equals what you have in the notes. So then you see the overall gross profit, and that's an important number. We believe that your gross profit should be 60%. So that's pretty simple. For every dollar that comes in your door, a portion goes to what you sold. It should be 40 cents, including your tax wages, leaving you with a gross profit of 60%. Now, I just want to quickly show you, and we're just getting an introduction into income statement here, and I want to show you the real financials data for a real shop. I'm not going to get into any detail about how big they are, how many technicians, but I just want to show you what a typical income statement would look like. We see the labor, the parts, the sublet, the tires, the shop supplies, the total sales of $26,642. This is a real shop. And just for the record, it only has one technician who doesn't have a service advisor, so he's interrupted a lot. When I look at an income statement the first time ever, the first two things I look at is labor and parts. Labor sales should be higher than parts. In this case, it's not, and we're going to show you why that is in later sessions, part 2. Cost of goods sold, we see what that looks like, and then we see the total cost of goods sold was $14,000, and then we see the gross profit. Now, I love this example because although this is a shop that's only a one-man show, his overall gross profit is actually a really good number. And later on, I'm going to show you more detail about the shop. So we see the sales, the income, the cost of goods sold, and the total gross profit. Now, I need to bring up one more thing, and that's for the next time, the income statement analysis tool. And I'm just going to spend about 10 minutes, and we're trying to stick to our 2 hours, so we have 10 minutes and 13 seconds left. This is what we call the profit builder. And I'm very well aware that the word technicians is spelled incorrectly, and I don't have the ability to go into this exact flash presentation and fix it. So I want to let you know that I am aware of it. It's just something I wasn't able to get fixed. This is a spreadsheet, and it's the one, or sorry, not a spreadsheet, it's software. And I wanted to show you that this is the document that's an executable file. So you get it as a doc.htm. Is that what you suggested? I'll do that. And then all you need to do is when you get the file along with the workbook, everything else, go to the profit builder, change it to right-click to be .exe, and you'll be able to use this as a spreadsheet or as an actual software package. So here's how this works, and your homework between now and the next session is to complete this for your own shop. The left-hand side is simply a scenario, a case study, so to speak, and here's where you fill in your information on the right-hand side. All you need to do is go next for each of these. So I can see that this shop has 3 technicians. They are available 8 hours in a day. They are open 5 days a week. That's 50 weeks in a year, a little bit of time off for vacations and holidays. Labor inventory in dollars is 6,000. The shop's labor rate in this case is only 63, and that tells us that the labor inventory in dollars is 378,000. Then you take what the shop actually did. Their sales for that period of time were 264,000. They could have done 378,000. So they sold 70%. Proficiency is saying they sold 70% of what they had available. So now all you need to do is fill in yours. So maybe you have 2 techs. And then of course you go, next you go In this case, you go enter. Down to the next line, daily available hours is probably going to be 8, but if you have 8.5, then go with that. Weeks, days per week, maybe you're open Saturday, so we'll go with that 6. And then the weeks in the year, let's stick with the 50 that we just looked at. And then we go calculate, and it tells us that our labor inventory in hours is 4,800. The labor rate, let's say for simple illustration purposes, is $101. Calculate, and that tells us that our labor inventory in hours could be 484,800. So what you do is look for your labor sales for that exact same period of time, and it will show you what your proficiency is. I will tell you, and I'll warn you, that the average shop, when they do this for the first time, is seeing a number here of about 45 to 55%. The average shop, and I don't exaggerate that, the average shop is selling about half of what they could. Some people could do as much with half as many technicians as they are doing. They could do as much with 3 as they're doing with 6. And I hate to bring the bad news, but don't be surprised if your number is fairly low there. So now all you need to do is go to next, and it brings you to the next slide. So now what it's going to show is the sales potential. And because it memorizes the numbers from before, you don't have to re-enter your information that you need from the previous page. When we go next, we see that the sample shop, we saw that from the previous page, 378,000. The labor mix means that 47% of their labor sales, or their 47% of the sales came from labor. So all we're doing is seeing what percentage of your labor sales. So you take your labor inventory, divide it into the annual sales potential, or what you did, if you want to calculate that way, and that'll tell you what percentage of your sales. So to make it clear, if your sales were $100,000 and your labor sales were 50,000 of that, that would be 50%. The annual sales potential of 804,225, it calculates that for us. The actual sales were 630,000, so the opportunity was 174,000. The previous page was looking at just labor. This is looking at other sales, saying that 47% came from labor, which means that the rest of that 53% came from parts, sublet, tires, towing, shop supplies, and environmental fees. It makes this calculation a lot simpler. So you go over here, and let's say that you determined that yours was 45%, and then it'll tell you right away that your, sorry, I should have hit calculate instead, was 1,077,000. You will put what you did for that year period, and it will show you the opportunity that you have. Okay, so let's say that we did 865,000, and again we just hit calculate here. It tells me that my opportunity with what I have, the number of technicians I have with the same labor rate, is I could do another $312,000 in sales for that same period. Okay, I'm going to show you one more here. Next, realizing the potential. The question is, how do you do that? And this is a little bit complex, but labor inventory in hours is this shop has 3 technicians, and the average employee is in your shop about 2,000 hours a year based on 40 hours a week, 50 weeks in a year. So your average technician is there for 6,000 hours. This shop is doing 3 hours per repair order, which is very good. That's our goal. The average customer is bringing in their vehicle 3 times a year. The average is 2 to 3. Maybe you are fortunate and you've done your marketing to get them there for 4. It's a bad number, I know, but 666 vehicles is how many I need. The average household has 2 vehicles, so I would only need 333 customers. Now, we're not trying to make this a perfect scenario that you have 333 customers, all with 2 vehicles, bringing 666 vehicles to you, buying 3 hours per work order 3 times a year for 6,000. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to really show you what you can do by increasing the hours per repair order. In other words, big picture, most shops don't have a car cam problem. The average shop I've seen has approximately 1,300 customers in their database. And if you're an average shop with 1,300 customers, you probably don't need new customers. Now, statistically, we lose 12 to 15% of our customers every year. Some die, some move away, some get a new car, go to the dealership or whatever. And again, we're going to look at the fixes for this later on. but most shops don't have a car count problem. They have a problem making every car count. So all you need to do, hopefully you know your hours per work order. Let's go 1.8. And let's say our average customer is actually only coming in twice a year on average. That would mean we'd need 1,333 vehicles. I did not do that intentionally for the 1,300 that I just mentioned. The average household has 2 vehicles, so that would mean that I would need 667 vehicles. But look at this. If I was to get my average ROs even up to 2.2, which is not that big of an increase, and again, the fixes we show you in further training, I need 545 vehicles in my database. Actually, that did that backwards. I did it wrong. Anyway, moving on to the next one. Break even per repair. This is, you're laughing at me. I'm under a little time pressure. This is the first time we're doing this as a webinar. I'm taking a full day class and turning it into 5 sections. So please just be patient as I go a little over here. Annual shop operating expenses. I need to go back and take a look at that other one. I'll do that afterwards. This shop, their annual operating expenses, all the expenses of the running the business. This is not your cost of goods sold. It's not what you paid for your tires or your parts or your techs. This is all the expenses of running the business. And you notice when we looked at income statement, we did not get into any expenses. I want you, first of all, please to focus on your sales, your cost of goods sold, and your gross profit. And in the next session, we get into the income statement in more detail. Annual number of repair orders they wrote was 2,000. The operating expenses per repair order were 120. The gross profit performance, they should be at 60. That's the benchmark. We just showed you that on the income statement with the data filled in. So the break even per repair order is $200. This is an important calculation because it shows you how much has to come in the door from each invoice to make money. So the question is, if it's 200 before you break even, how many invoices can you write for an oil change only? How many can you write for a tire repair only? Now there are some of those, but at the same time, there are some that are higher gross profit or a bigger invoice or whatever. And in future sessions, we're going to go through and talk about how we can increase the gross profit. If we're not at 60, we're at 45, how to get to 60. The idea is to get to be profitable at a lower number than that 200, okay? So again, you fill in your numbers there. By the way, just so you know, you can navigate to the other slides right here. The next slide is the technician's time per minute value. The labor rate is $63 at this shop. The labor mix was 47%. We saw that already. Their hourly revenue for everything combined, $134. Divided by 60 minutes in the hour, the average technician's time is worth $2.23 a minute. So when we get into productivity and efficiency, like we saw with the shop for Dustin, Kendra, and Scott, then we see the ability to be able to get much better numbers. So my timer just went off. The labor rate, well, let's go with the 101. Remember that from before, the labor mix was 55%. A lot of shops are closer to 50, so we'll use that number. The hourly revenue calculates for us, so our technician's time is worth $3.33 a minute. So every minute of the day, your technician's time is worth that $3.33 a minute. Now with that, I'm going to end it here. The next slides, I'd like to spend more time. I do not want to rush through those. So when we resume with part 2, I'm going to come right back to this. In the interim, your homework assignment between now and next time is to do all of this for yourself. You can just bring it right up to the slide of your technician's time per minute value. If you do want to go ahead of that before we get into the training of that, that's fine. I just want to give you an indication of what we cover next time, part 2. We're going to get into more of the income statement analysis. I'm going to introduce you to key performance indicators. I'm going to introduce you to the parts matrix and the algorithmic matrix and why there's a difference between the two and why I upgraded our regular maintenance to an algorithmic. You are going to receive both of them, and the reason is if you have a shop management system that does not allow you to put in an algorithmic type matrix, then you're going to be able to see that you could just use that matrix, or better yet, if your software won't allow you to do it, I recommend that you have the algorithmic one right on your computer. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and just take a few extra seconds to go through, and it'll make a difference for you. My experience is that if an average 3 technician shop goes from what they're doing in parts gross profit to using the algorithmic calculator, it's approximately $54,000 in additional net profit in a year. Almost $100,000 gross sales increase with approximately a $54,000 net increase by using that matrix alone. Some people say, wow, that's a little extra work to have it on the computer. Well, do you want 54,000 or not? I'm going to introduce you to what we call the income statement analysis tool. And just so you know, so you can see what we're going to do, we are going to take this exact same shop, which is a real shop with one technician, and I'm going to show you how to take the data from this income statement, put it into what we call the income statement analysis tool, and just give you a sneak peek of that. And that is that exact same shop, but we're going to go through and show you how to calculate the income statement analysis tool. This was that shop, but it was for a full year. So we are going to show you literally in about 10 minutes a month, maybe 15, depending on how good your income statement setup is, your cost of goods sold, your chart of accounts, and whether you're getting some from your GemCar software or whatever software you have, or QuickBooks. Depends on how that is set up, but you should be able to do this in about 10 minutes a month. So I'm going to show you how to take that data and put it into the income statement analysis tool. And then I'm going to assign you the instructions on how to prepare at least one ISAP between session 2 and session 3. So with that, I apologize for going over a little bit. I wanted to keep it with 2 hours. Normally our live webinars go 90 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer than that, and then a question and answer period. But in this case, we're recording this not live. Well, recording it live, but without an audience, so there's no questions. So each session is going to be approximately 2 hours. So with that, go back, kick butt. I want to encourage you to make sure that your chart of accounts is close to what we have here. Now, you don't want to go back and change your chart of accounts. Your accountant would not be happy with that. You may want to do it at the next new month. You may want to do it at the end of your fiscal year into the first month. It's something you definitely want to talk to your accountant about. I felt many people start the next month and say, okay, right up till now, we know what we've got, but let's go ahead and change it so that going forward, we see the breakdown we have here. I highly recommend that you do use the breakdown that we have here. So go back, take a look at your income statement, and maybe make some changes to your chart of accounts. By the way, I should have mentioned that most shop software has chart of account numbers. So there'll be a number for revenue codes. There'll be a number for cost of goods sold codes. There'll be a number for cost of goods sold or gross profit codes. You don't really need that. I've used QuickBooks for well over 20 years. I don't use numbers. Kevin and I were talking to somebody recently. They don't use numbers. Numbers were important when it was more of a manual system. So on your check that you wrote, we would write down what chart of account number so the bookkeeper would know, because they don't know our specific industry, exactly which chart of account this would go into. But a lot more bookkeeping and accounting is being done by shops through their shop management software or QuickBooks or a program like that. Another thing, by the way, that is helpful is when you're ordering a part, that you use the PO number as the RO number that you're ordering those parts for. So that holds true till today as well. I know a lot of you do that. Some people don't. So whenever you order a part, use the PO number for the repair order number. So when you come back and look at it later, you know exactly which repair order those parts went on. Kevin, thank you very much. And you can take your time going on to session 2. In the interim, if you have any questions, me, Kelly at kellythecoach.com, and Kevin, yours is?
kking at gem-car.com. So kking at gem-car.com.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Appreciate your input, and we'll be talking to you on the next session. Kevin, you're awesome, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.